Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and give you the essential blueprint for the world's most critical economic shifts. Today, we're taking on, well, perhaps the biggest challenge facing modern society. How do you transition an entire global economy away from the resources that built it toward a system powered by life itself?
That resource, of course, is fossil carbon, oil, coal, gas, even uranium. These finite materials, they've fueled the massive industrialization of the past couple of centuries, immense progress. But the cost is now, well, it's starkly visible if you just look at the period between 1970 and 2010. An astonishing 78% of the increase in global greenhouse gas emissions came specifically from burning fossil fuels and related industrial processes. 78%.
Wow. So we're essentially running on a massive carbon debt.
We absolutely are.
And the paradox, it seems, is that if you look at the natural world, the engine we're trying to transition back to, it operates on an almost unimaginable scale.
Right. Before the whole fossil era kicked off, nature provided everything. Food, materials, energy.
Everything.
And that biological engine, it's still running at full capacity. Photosynthesis alone assimilates about 175 petagrams of carbon every single year.
175 petagrams. Can you put that into perspective for us? How big is that really?
Okay, think of it like this. That's roughly 300,000 billion tons of biomass generated annually.
300,000 billion tons.
Yeah. That's the resource base we're talking about, systematically harnessing. It's enormous.
And that brings us right to the core of this deep dive, the bioeconomy.
Exactly. It's this intentional, really necessary shift back toward using non-fossil organic carbon resources.
Derived recently, you said?
Critically, yes. Derived recently, let's say within the last 100 years, from living organisms, plants, animals, algae, even waste streams.
So it's an economic system driven not by mining the deep past like we do with fossil fuels?
Precisely. But by utilizing contemporary biological knowledge and, crucially, systems thinking. It's about managing flows, not just extracting stock.
Our mission today, then, is to give you a comprehensive shortcut to understanding this huge transformation. We're going to map out why this global shift is so urgent, touch on the complex technologies involved, the policy battle.
Oh, there are definitely policy battles.
Right. And most importantly, maybe, the new governance tools we need to manage this whole thing without just feeling completely overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of it all. Okay, so let's start with the urgency. This isn't some abstract future challenge, is it? It's driven by severe, measurable crises happening right now.
Absolutely. It starts with this idea of planetary overload. We hear about climate change constantly, almost background noise sometimes. Sure. But when you drill down into the specific greenhouse gases, some of the data is, frankly, shocking.
Okay, let's get specific then. We know CO2 is the main culprit.
It is, and we use it as the baseline, right? Global warming potential, GWP, of 1.
Yeah.
Methane, CH4, is more potent, GWP of 28 over 100 years.
28 times CO2.
Yeah.
Still significant.
Very. But the real sort of silent heavy hitter, the one often overlooked in public discussion, is nitrous oxide.
N2O.
N2O.
Okay.
What's its impact?
Its GWP over 100 years is 265.
Let me say that again.
265. One molecule of N2O traps 265 times more heat than one molecule of CO2 over a century.
That number alone changes the perspective completely. Where does most of that N2O come from? Is it mostly agriculture?
A really significant portion, comes from agricultural soils, especially when nitrogen fertilizers are overapplied or mismanaged, leading to volatilization. It just escapes into the atmosphere.
And the impact isn't just warming the air, right? These gases cause other huge problems.
Oh, absolutely. It's systemic. CO2 uptake is warming and acidifying the oceans, which is a massive threat to marine ecosystems. And we see tangible sea level rise. It's measurable and it's accelerating. Currently, somewhere between 1.5 and 1.9 millimeters per year. That's not just weather. That's the system changing.
And then there's the stress on the land itself. You mentioned intensification earlier. The figures are kind of mind-boggling. They really are. Think about it. Global agricultural production increased 2.5 to 3 times over the last 50 years. A huge jump.
Okay, massive increase. So land use must have expanded massively too?
That's the kicker. It didn't. The actual agricultural land area only expanded by about 12%.
Only 1%? How is that even possible?
Through incredible intensification. Better seeds, more fertilizer, more irrigation, mechanization. But that level of intensification puts an enormous strain on the natural capital.
Leading to things like soil degradation.
Exactly. It accelerates soil degradation, makes it worse. This is especially acute in places like semi-arid areas, regions in sub-Saharan Africa or areas undergoing rapid, often unchecked deforestation like parts of Southeast Asia or South America. The land just can't maintain its fertility under that constant high pressure.
So the soil surface is degrading. And if we look under the soil, there's another problem related to that intensification, a resource dependency.
A huge one. Phosphorus.
For fertilizers.
Right. Phosphate rock, RP, is the mined source for basically all our phosphorus fertilizer. And it's finite. There's only so much of it in the ground.
And there's no substitute for phosphorus in growing food, is there?
None whatsoever. It's an essential element for life. Recognizing this strategic fragility, this vulnerability, the European Commission actually added phosphate rock to its official list of critical raw materials way back in 2014.
Critical raw material, meaning its supply is at risk and it's vital for the economy.
Precisely. So if our entire global food system relies on depleting a finite resource with no substitute, well, you can see the fundamental problem. That system isn't sustainable in the long run. It's built on a depleting foundation.
Okay, so we've got greenhouse gases, ocean acidification, sea level rise, soil degradation, critical resource depletion. This paints a pretty stark picture of environmental failure. Where does the bioeconomy concept fit into this bigger planetary context?
Well, it really forces us to think about the limits. We have to reference the concept of the 9 planetary boundaries. Have you come across this framework?
I have, yes. The idea of a safe operating space for humanity defined by these key Earth system processes.
Exactly. It defines the environmental limits we absolutely must respect. And what's really striking, and frankly alarming, is that we're not just hovering near these limits for some critical areas. We have already certainly breached 2 of them.
Already over the line.
Yeah.
Which 2 are those, and why should those specific ones worry us the most?
The 2 that are definitely in the red zone are biosphere integrity and biochemical flows.
Biosphere integrity. That sounds like the overall health of ecosystems.
It is. It's about the capacity of the Earth to support functioning, adaptive communities of organisms, genetic diversity, functional diversity, and it's deeply compromised.
And biochemical flows, that connects back to the N2O and phosphorus, right?
Directly. Specifically, the framework highlights the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. We've massively altered these flows through industrial fertilizer production and agriculture.
And these 2 boundaries being crossed.
Yeah.
They're linked.
Absolutely interconnected. Exceeding the boundaries for N and P flows directly undermines the overall integrity of the biosphere. It disrupts ecosystems from the base up. It means the systemic risk isn't theoretical anymore. It's here. The fundamental nutrient cycles that underpin all life are already dangerously out of balance.
So this is the ultimate rationale for the bioeconomy shift. It's not just about finding replacements for oil. It's about fixing these fundamental cycles.
That's the deeper imperative, yes. We cannot simply tweak efficiencies within a fundamentally broken system that's overloading the planet. We have to change the resource base itself, moving towards biological resources managed within these planetary boundaries.
Okay, so the planet is already under immense systemic stress. The next unavoidable question is, how much more stress is coming? Which leads us straight to population growth and food security.
Right. The forecasts are pretty clear. We're projected to hit 9 billion people by 2050. That's up from 7 billion just recently, around 2017.
2 billion more mouths to feed in roughly 3 decades.
And it's not just the number of people. As economies develop, diets change. People tend to consume more resource-intensive foods.
You mean more meat and dairy, primarily, which are notoriously heavy on resource use.
Exactly. Meat production is incredibly biomass intensive. Depending on the animal and the farming system, it can take anywhere from 3 kilograms up to 100 kilograms of biomass feed to produce just 1 kilogram of finished meat.
3 to 100 kilos of input for 1 kilo of output? That's a huge range, but even the low end is significant.
It is. And given these combined pressures, more people, richer diets, the projections are that global food production needs to increase by 70% overall by 2050.
70% globally.
And in developing economies where population growth and dietary shifts are often happening faster, that increase needs to be closer to 100%, doubling food production.
Doubling. Okay. That implies maximizing every single yield, every calorie produced, becomes absolutely critical.
Paramount.
But here's the deep irony, isn't it? While we're stressing the planet, pushing boundaries to meet this massive projected increase, We're simultaneously losing a staggering amount of what we already produce long before it even gets near a consumer's plate.
The food loss problem it's phenomenal. It's almost criminal when you think about the resources wasted, even before you count the food people throw away at home.
Right, just in the supply chain, from farm to retailer.
Just in that part. Estimates suggest we lose about 35% of all cereals globally. Staple crops, a third just gone.
A third of grains lost. And for more perishable things.
It's even worse. For things like roots, tubers, fruits, and vegetables, the highly perishable stuff, the losses are estimated at over 50%.
50%. Half of all fruits and vegetables grown, lost in transit, storage, processing.
Essentially, yes. It's a phenomenal amount of energy, water, land, fertilizer, all invested, and then the product just spoils or is discarded somewhere along the chain.
That level of inefficiency is just staggering. It seems like tackling that waste has to be as important as increasing yields.
It absolutely has to be. A core part of any sensible bioeconomy strategy must focus heavily on the logistical and technological aspects of reducing waste. Better storage, better transport, more effective preservation technologies, developing crop varieties that are naturally more resistant to spoilage or disease.
Because reducing that 50% loss rate is effectively like instantly increasing the global supply without needing more land or water.
Precisely. Every percentage point of loss we claw back is a direct gain in efficiency and reduces the pressure on primary production. We need to attack the waste problem just as aggressively as we pursue higher yields.
Okay, we've definitely established the urgency, the dire necessity for change. Now let's pivot a bit and get into the policy side. Let's try and define what this bioeconomy actually is. It feels like the term itself has evolved quite a bit since it first emerged.
It really has. Its origins are quite specific. The term likely solidified in the late 1990s, possibly first used publicly at a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, maybe around 1997.
And back then, the focus wasn't so much on sustainability or resource limits.
Not primarily, no. Initially, it was strongly defined by people in the life sciences, particularly geneticists. The focus was very much on the industrial consequences of breakthroughs in biology. Think the dawn of the genomics age. It was about new products, new processes derived from biological understanding.
Right, more about the biotech revolution than resource substitution.
Exactly. And that initial focus really shaped the two major perspectives or maybe interpretations of the bioeconomy that we still see today. They often compete, actually.
Okay, let's unpack those. What are the two main ways people frame the bioeconomy?
Well, the first is what you might call the biotechnology innovation perspective. This is very much the tech fix view. It focuses on developing revolutionary new technologies, genomics, synthetic biology, advanced biomaterials. It's about creating entirely new economic value, new products, new industries, all driven by biological science innovation.
So innovation for novelty, for new markets. And the second perspective is driven more by that sense of urgency we just discussed.
That's right. The second is the resource substitution perspective. Now, initially, this was really kicked off by anxieties over peak oil, the idea that conventional oil production was going to plateau and decline, creating an energy crisis.
Ah, so replacing fossil fuels for energy security reasons first.
Originally, yes. But now, that driver has shifted significantly. Today, the resource substitution view is primarily framed by the need for climate protection. The absolute mandate is to replace fossil resources wherever possible, fuels, chemicals, plastic materials, with bio-based alternatives to decarbonize the economy.
Okay, so we have innovation for novelty versus substitution for survival, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
And these two drivers have led to a huge wave of policy adoption globally, right?
A massive wave. By the early 2010s, it was clearly becoming a major policy concept. You saw the U.S. release its national bioeconomy blueprint in 2012. Germany followed with its national policy strategy on bioeconomy in 2013. The first global bioeconomy summit was held in Berlin in 2015. It showed the concept had really arrived on the world stage.
But just having strategies isn't enough. You mentioned a critical pivot point, the sustainability imperative.
Yes, this was crucial. For the bioeconomy to become more than just industrial biotechnology or simple resource swapping, it had to be explicitly linked back to the foundational concept of sustainable development.
The Brundtland definition from '87.
Exactly. The definition from the Brundtland Commission's report, Our Common Future, in 1987, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This introduces those critical ethical dimensions: intergenerational justice, fairness among people alive today, and intergenerational justice, fairness to future people.
And this is where it gets a bit philosophical, doesn't it? Because sustainability itself isn't one single thing. There are different schools of thought on how we should manage natural capital. Let's unpack the difference between weak and strong sustainability. People often confuse them.
This distinction is absolutely vital for understanding the policy debates and choices being made. So at one end of the spectrum, you have weak sustainability.
Okay, what's the core idea there?
The core idea is that natural capital, like forests, fisheries, minerals, can be substituted by man-made or anthropogenic capital, like machinery, buildings, knowledge. As long as the total stock of capital doesn't decrease, development is considered sustainable.
So you could, theoretically, cut down a forest.
If you invest the profits into, say, building schools or factories that generate equivalent or greater value for human well-being over time. Weak sustainability focuses heavily on efficiency and maintaining overall productive capacity.
But the obvious critique there is that some natural things, clean air, biodiversity, stable climate, seem pretty irreplaceable. You can't just engineer them back once they're gone.
Precisely. And that leads us to the other end of the spectrum, strong sustainability. This view is much stricter.
How so?
Strong sustainability argues that natural capital and man-made capital are fundamentally complements, not substitutes, especially for critical natural resources. It dictates that humanity must essentially live off the interest generated by natural capital, not deplete the principle.
So, non-renewable resources.
Their use is seen as inherently unsustainable and should be phased out. And the use of renewable resources must be strictly limited by the environment's capacity to regenerate them. It accepts that there are non-negotiable ecological limits.
That sounds very challenging in practice. Is there a middle ground that informs most current policy?
Yes, thankfully. There's what's often called quasi-sustainability or critical sustainability. This sits somewhere in the middle.
How does it work?
It acknowledges that some substitution between capital types is possible and probably necessary. However, it also recognizes that certain elements of natural capital are absolutely critical and non-substitutable. It focuses on identifying and respecting crucial thresholds or boundaries.
So this connects directly back to the planetary boundaries framework we discussed earlier.
Exactly. The planetary boundaries provide those critical thresholds. Crossing them, like with biosphere integrity or biochemical flows, is seen as fundamentally altering the safe operating space, creating risks that cannot simply be compensated for by building more factories or accumulating more financial wealth. This critical limits approach gives policymakers clearer red lines to avoid crossing.
Okay, that framework makes sense. But despite being framed as this essential solution to multiple crises, the bioeconomy concept itself isn't universally accepted. It attracts quite significant criticism, doesn't it? We need to address that.
Absolutely. We have to present these points of contention fairly. One of the major critiques comes from a perspective that sees the concept as being dominated by neoliberal ideology.
Neoliberal, meaning focused on market solutions, privatization, corporate interests.
Essentially, yes. Critics argue that, given its origins in biotech innovation, the bioeconomy primarily serves the interests of large corporations looking to commercialize potentially contested technologies like genetic engineering or synthetic biology and open up new markets for biological commodities.
And the potential danger there, according to this critique, is what? Exploitation.
The fear is that this corporate-driven push for bio-based resources could exacerbate existing global inequalities. It might encourage practices like land grabbing, where large entities acquire vast tracts of land, often in developing countries, for industrial agriculture or biofuel production.
Directly threatening local food security for the sake of, say, generating fuel for richer countries.
That's the core concern. It highlights the potential tension between rapid technological deployment driven by corporate interests and ensuring social equity and food sovereignty for local populations.
Okay, that's one major line of criticism. What's the other common one? You mentioned greenwashing.
Right. This critique is perhaps more nuanced. It often acknowledges the potential benefits of a bioeconomy, but warns that many approaches currently being promoted under that label don't necessarily deliver true environmental sustainability across their entire life cycle.
Like the biofuel example you gave earlier.
Exactly. If producing biofuels requires converting rainforests or peatlands into plantations, the carbon debt from that land use change can completely negate any climate benefit from replacing fossil fuels. Reports, even back in 2009, from groups like the WWF, were highlighting this risk.
So the greenwashing argument is that simply labeling something bio-based doesn't automatically make it sustainable.
Precisely. It's a caution against assuming that substitution alone equals sustainability. You have to look critically at the entire system, land use, biodiversity impacts, social consequences, actual net GHG balance. The label itself isn't enough. We have to acknowledge that the bioeconomy is and likely will remain contested territory with genuine trade-offs and risks.
All right, let's shift gears now and focus on the supply side, the actual bio-based resources and how we produce them. It all begins with the most fundamental process on Earth,
Yeah.
photosynthesis.
The ultimate green technology, really. Simple inputs: CO2 from the air, water from the soil, and energy from sunlight. The output: carbohydrates, the building blocks of biomass and oxygen.
Seems straightforward, but you mentioned it's not perfectly efficient.
Far from it, in energy terms. The theoretical maximum efficiency for converting solar energy into chemical energy in biomass is around 12%.
12% max. What about in a real-world field?
Well, when you account for all the energy losses a plant experiences while growing, respiration, reflection, incomplete light absorption, the actual observed efficiency of a typical growing crop is usually only about 8%, sometimes less.
Only 8% capture of incoming sunlight into biomass.
Yeah.
That really underscores why we need to be incredibly efficient in how we use that captured energy, that biomass.
Absolutely. We start with a relatively low conversion efficiency, so minimizing losses and maximizing value in every subsequent step is critical.
Okay, so once we've harvested this biomass, how do we begin to think about using it? Classification seems key.
Classification is paramount. The first big split, obviously, is edible versus non-edible, especially to manage the food-fuel-feed competition. But chemically, we classify biomass by its main components: starch, sugar, lignocellulose, that's the woody stuff, cellulose and lignin, oils, and proteins.
And there's the crucial chemical difference there that impacts how we prioritize use, particularly around nitrogen.
Yes, this is fundamental. If you look at starch, sugar, cellulose, lignin, oils, they are primarily made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, CHO. Only proteins contain significant amounts of nitrogen in.
Because amino acids, the building blocks of protein, all contain nitrogen.
Exactly. And since nitrogen is often the limiting nutrient in ecosystems and is absolutely essential for food and animal feed, any coherent bioeconomy strategy has to prioritize the efficient capture and cycling of nitrogen, primarily through protein production and use. We can't afford to waste nitrogen resources on lower value applications if protein needs aren't met.
Got it. So we have these different biomass components. How do we maximize yields and tailor those components for specific uses? This is where technology comes in, particularly green biotechnology.
Right. Green biotechnology uses tools like genetic engineering to modify organisms, plants, microbes for desired outcomes. It's a way to accelerate and target the improvements we need.
How does it compare to traditional plant breeding methods?
Traditional breeding relies on selecting desirable traits from natural variation and then slowly concentrating them through generations of crossing. It works. Obviously, it gave us all our current crops. But it can be slow and somewhat imprecise. You might bring undesirable traits along with the good ones.
And genetic engineering.
It's potentially much faster and far more specific. Scientists can identify a specific gene responsible for a trait, say, pest resistance, and insert just that gene, or modify an existing one to achieve the desired outcome, often in a single generation.
And these genetic applications, they fall into two broad categories affecting different parts of the value chain.
That's a useful distinction, yes. We talk about input traits and output traits.
Input traits are those about helping the crop grow better.
Exactly. Input traits are designed to improve the process of primary production. Things like resistance to pests or diseases, tolerance to drought or herbicides. They reduce input needs or protect yield.
And output traits change the actual product.
Correct. Output traits modify the composition or quality of the harvested biomass itself. This is really crucial for the industrial side of the bioeconomy. Examples would be altering the starch structure in corn to make it better for producing bioplastics, or modifying the lignin content or structure in trees to make the wood easier to pulp for paper or break down for biofuels or building materials.
That makes sense. Now, there's a lot of debate currently around newer gene editing techniques like CRISPR-Cas9.
Yeah.
Why is that technology causing such a stir compared to older GMO methods?
The debate is largely about regulation and definition. CRISPR-Cas9 technology is incredibly precise. It allows scientists to make very targeted changes to an organism's existing DNA, like editing a single letter, deleting a short sequence, or inserting a new one sometimes without introducing any genetic material from a different species, which was typical of older GMO techniques.
So you could potentially make a change that could have occurred naturally through mutation, but much faster and more predictably.
Exactly. And the regulatory question that arises is, if a modification is made using CRISPR and no foreign DNA is permanently integrated into the organism's genome, should that organism still be classified and regulated under the strict rules originally designed for traditional GMOs that involved inserting foreign genes? It challenges the very definition of GMO in many legal frameworks.
A major legal and ethical gray area then. Beyond direct genetic manipulation, there's also this powerful convergence happening between biology and the digital world, right? Bioinformatics and omics.
Yes, this is a huge accelerator. Bioinformatics is the field that uses computational tools to manage and analyze massive biological data sets. We talk about omics, data genomics, DNA sequences, proteomics, proteins present, metabolomics, metabolites or small molecules.
And how does managing all that data drive biological outcomes or products?
It allows for incredibly targeted design and prediction. Let me give you a concrete example. Designing a therapeutic antibody using plants. Scientists use bioinformatic tools to analyze antibody structures and design the specific gene sequence needed for an antibody targeting a particular cancer protein.
Okay, designed on a computer.
Then they synthesized that DNA sequence and introduced it into tobacco cell cultures. These plant cells, grown in bioreactors, acted like miniature factories, using their own cellular machinery to produce the specific antibody protein encoded by the designed gene.
Wow. So direct from digital sequence data to a physical, complex medical protein produced in a plant cell system.
Precisely. It's a powerful demonstration of how integrating biology, data science, and engineering can lead to novel biomanufacturing pathways, potentially bypassing traditional chemical synthesis or animal-based production for some complex molecules.
Okay, fascinating tech. Let's ground this back in the actual production systems. Starting on land agriculture, how does a bioeconomy perspective change how we think about farming itself?
Well, the ideal shift is away from purely extractive, high-input industrial farming towards approaches that actively conserve and regenerate the resource base, particularly the soil. Conservation agriculture or conservation farming is a key concept here.
What defines conservation agriculture?
It's generally based on three core principles. First, minimum soil disturbance, so reducing or eliminating tillage, moving towards no-till systems. Second, maintaining permanent soil cover, either with the crop itself or with cover crops or residues, to protect against erosion and retain moisture. And third, implementing crop diversification, moving away from monocultures towards rotations or intercropping systems.
And implementing these principles helps prevent that soil degradation we talked about earlier.
That's the goal, yes. These practices are specifically designed to improve soil health, increase organic matter, enhance water infiltration, and reduce erosion, fundamentally making agriculture more resilient and less degrading over the long term.
Now, moving from fields to forests, wood is obviously a classic biomaterial, but it seems to have unique advantages in a bioeconomy context, especially around carbon.
Wood is fantastic. It's relatively light, strong for its weight, flexible, often beautiful, making it great for construction and materials. But crucially, as a tree grows, it locks up atmospheric CO2 in its biomass. Using wood in long-lived products like buildings or furniture effectively stores that carbon.
A carbon sink. Does the type of wood matter much for storage?
Hugely. It depends on the density. Take 1 cubic meter of wood. Lightweight balsa wood stores about 222 kilograms of CO2. But a really dense, slow-growing hardwood like pawwood, that same cubic meter stores a phenomenal 1935 kilograms of CO2.
Nearly 10 times the storage for the same volume.
Exactly. So promoting the use of sustainably harvested, high-density woods in construction represents a massive opportunity for both material substitution, replacing concrete and steel, and significant climate mitigation through long-term carbon storage. And of course, dry wood is also a good energy source, providing about 5 to 5.2 kilowatt hours of energy per kilogram.
Okay, land and forest covered. What about production systems in water, aquaculture, and increasingly microalgae?
Aquaculture, fish farming is definitely intensifying. The trend is moving away from extensive, open systems that rely heavily on natural feeds and towards more intensive, often closed containment systems like ponds or tanks, where inputs can be controlled more precisely.
And microalgae. They seem to be getting a lot of attention.
They are, for several good reasons. Microalgae cultivation, often done in systems like closed tubular or flat panel photobioreactors, has some key advantages. Firstly, it can be vastly more water efficient than land-based crops because the water is recirculated. You don't have the same evaporation losses.
Less freshwater demand, that's huge.
Crucial in water-scarce regions. Secondly, you can often grow them on non-arable land or even use wastewater as a nutrient source. But Perhaps most importantly, you can significantly influence their biochemical composition by controlling the growing conditions.
So,
For instance, by adjusting nutrient levels or light exposure, you can push microalgae to produce high levels of specific compounds. For animal feed applications, some strains can achieve a protein content of up to 60% of their dry cell mass.
60% protein. That's incredibly high.
It is. It makes microalgae potentially one of the most efficient and fastest growing sources of high quality protein available, which could directly address the projected global protein deficit without competing for prime agricultural land. It's a really promising area.
All right, so we've grown or harvested the biomass. The next critical stage is processing it into useful products. In traditional food processing, the goals are usually things like quality, extending shelf life, ensuring safety. Often using methods like heating, drying, or fermentation, how does industrial bioprocessing differ?
While some principles overlap, the core driver in industrial bioprocessing is often what we call the technology structure function relationship.
Okay, break that down. Technology structure function.
It means the inherent chemical and physical structure of your starting biomass, whether it's the long chains of cellulose and wood, the granules of starch and corn, or the oils and seeds, fundamentally dictates the type of processing technology you need to apply, like enzymes, heat, chemicals, microbes, to achieve the desired end function in your product, like the strength of a bioplastic, the reactivity of a chemical intermediate, or the energy content of a biofuel.
So the raw materials nature locks you into certain processing pathways.
To a large extent, yes. You have to match the technology to the structure to get the function you want efficiently.
And a major tool for this industrial conversion is industrial biotechnology, sometimes called white biotechnology.
Correct. White biotech uses biological systems, living cells, or their components, like enzymes as the catalyst to carry out industrial processes.
Can you walk us through the typical stages involved in a white biotech process?
Sure. It generally operates in three main phases. First is upstream processing. This involves preparing everything needed for the core reaction. Developing or optimizing the microbial strain, like a specific yeast or bacterium, maybe through genetic engineering, and preparing the growth medium, the nutrient soup the microbes will live in.
Okay, getting the bugs and their food ready. Then the main event.
Phase two is the bioreaction or fermentation itself. This is where the biocatalyst, the microorganisms, yeast cells, or maybe isolated enzymes gets to work, converting the feedstock or substrate into the desired product within a bioreactor vessel.
And finally, getting the actual product out.
That's the third phase, downstream processing. And this is often the most challenging and expensive part. It involves separating the target product from the complex mixture in the bioreactor, which includes water, leftover nutrients, cell debris, and possibly byproducts, and then purifying it to the required specification.
Why is downstream so costly?
Because often the desired product might only make up a small fraction, say 10–15% of the total volume of the fermentation broth. So you need sophisticated, often energy-intensive separation and purification techniques like filtration, chromatography, distillation to isolate it cleanly. Downstream efficiency is absolutely critical for the overall economics of the process.
Makes sense. What are some of the big commercial success stories that have come out of this white biotech approach? Products we might encounter?
Well, in the realm of bioplastics, the front runner for quite some time has been polylactic acid, or PLA. It's made from fermented plant sugars, usually cornstarch.
Okay.
Production volumes were already significant, around 370,000 tons per year back in the early 2010s, and it's used in packaging, fibers, and even 3D printing.
PLA, right. Heard of that one. Any others that really showcase the power of the underlying tech, like synthetic biology?
A really great example of synthetic biology hitting industrial scale is the production of propane 1,3-divinyl, or PDO. PDO is a chemical used to make polymers, like high-performance polyesters used in carpets and textiles. Sorona Fiber is a well-known brand.
And how is synthetic biology used there?
Naturally, no single organism efficiently produces PDO from simple sugars like glucose. So scientists had to engineer a pathway. They took specific genes responsible for parts of the conversion process from two different natural organisms, a particular yeast and a bacterium, and cloned those genes into a workhorse industrial microbe, E. coli.
So they built a completely new metabolic pathway inside E. coli.
Exactly. They created a novel recombinant organism specifically designed to efficiently convert glucose into PDO. It was really one of the first landmark industrial applications demonstrating the power of synthetic biology to design and build biological systems for manufacturing chemicals.
That's impressive. Now, that relies on biological catalysts, microbes, but you also mentioned that some biomass, maybe the tougher stuff, is better converted using just heat, thermochemical conversion.
That's right. For drier, often lignocellulosic biomass, thermochemical routes are very important. These involve converting the biomass using heat, either with limited oxygen or no oxygen.
And there are different outcomes depending on the process conditions.
Yes. For instance, fast pyrolysis, which involves heating the biomass very quickly in the absence of air, primarily breaks it down into a liquid product, often called bio-oil or tar. You can get yields around 60% liquid. Gasification, on the other hand, uses higher temperatures and usually a controlled amount of oxygen or steam, and it converts most of the biomass, around 85%, into a mixture of combustible gases called syngas, mainly carbon monoxide and hydrogen.
Okay, pyrolysis for liquids, gasification for gases, using dry biomass. But you mentioned a key difference for wet biomass, hydrothermal processes.
Yes, this is a really important distinction. Hydrothermal processes work with wet biomass, things like sewage, sludge, food waste, manure, or aquatic biomass like algae, without needing that energy-intensive, costly pre-drying step.
How do they work without drying?
They leverage the unique properties of water itself under high temperature and pressure, subcritical or supercritical conditions. In this state, water acts as both a solvent and a catalyst. Its polar molecules can effectively break down the complex polar bonds within the wet biomass structure. So it's fundamentally different from dry pyrolysis or gasification. It uses the water within the feedstock as part of the reaction medium. This makes it potentially much more efficient for those high-moisture feedstocks that are otherwise difficult to process.
Fascinating. Okay, so with all these different feedstocks, conversion technologies, and potential products from food to fuels to chemicals to materials, it sounds like the old idea of a simple linear value chain, raw material product disposal, doesn't really capture the reality of the bioeconomy.
Not at all. It's far too simplistic. We really need to think in terms of a complex bio-based value web or network.
A web. Why a web?
Because of the inherent nature of biomass processing and the drive for efficiency, it necessitates what we call cascading use.
Cascading use, meaning using the biomass multiple times or for multiple purposes.
Exactly. It means prioritizing the highest value applications first, and then utilizing the residues, byproducts, and co-products from each stage in subsequent processes. You try to extract maximum value from every fraction of the initial biomass.
Can you give an example of that cascading in practice?
The sugarcane industry in Brazil is a classic example. The primary goal might be producing sugar for food or ethanol for fuel, but the fibrous residue left after crushing the cane, called bagasse, isn't treated as waste.
Right, you mentioned they burn it.
Yes, it's typically burned right there in the sugar mill in high-efficiency boilers to generate steam and electricity. Often, the mill produces enough power to run its entire operation and even exports surplus electricity to the grid. So you have sugar, ethanol, and electricity all coming from the same initial feedstock, plus potentially other co-products. It creates this intricate web of interconnected processes and value streams, far more complex than a linear chain.
And managing that complexity, bringing all those different players together.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier it can actually speed things up.
It sounds counterintuitive, but yes. Experience from various R&D projects has shown that when you actively integrate all the potential participants across a new bio-based value chain, right from the primary producers, farmers, foresters, through the different tiers of processors, technology providers, and even the final product manufacturers and marketers right from the early stages of research and development.
Yep.
You can actually decrease the development cycle time for bringing new bio-based products to market by as much as half.
Cut development time in half just by collaborating across the web. Why does that happen?
Because you identify potential bottlenecks, technical mismatches, market needs, and regulatory hurdles much earlier in the process. Everyone understands the requirements and constraints of the other players. It avoids costly mistakes and redesigns later on. Collaboration becomes the accelerator for innovation in this complex system.
Okay, collaboration is key. Now let's shift to the market dynamics. How does introducing large-scale bio-based products, like biofuels, affect the equilibrium in existing commodity markets? You used the maize biofuel example earlier.
Right. It creates new and sometimes volatile interconnections. Let's revisit that maize biofuel link. Imagine the price of crude oil goes up significantly,
Okay, makes gasoline more expensive.
which in turn increases the demand for biofuels like ethanol made from maize, corn, because it becomes a more cost-competitive substitute fuel.
So biofuel demand rises.
This higher demand pushes up the equilibrium price for biofuels. But here's the critical linkage. Because biofuel producers now want to buy more maize to meet that demand, the demand for the agricultural commodity maize also increases.
Which pushes up the price of maize.
Exactly. So a rise in the price of crude oil can directly lead to a rise in the price of a staple food commodity like maize. The bioeconomy fundamentally links energy markets with agricultural and food markets in ways they weren't linked before. This can increase price volatility and carries significant implications for food security, especially if policies aren't designed very carefully to manage these interactions.
A potential downside, if not managed. And managing it requires policy support, built on clear sustainability strategies. We touched on weak and strong sustainability earlier. How do those translate into practical policy approaches for guiding the transition? You mentioned three base strategies.
Yes, broadly, policymakers tend to frame the transition using three core sustainability strategies. The first is eco-efficiency.
Eco-efficiency. That sounds like the weak sustainability approach, doing more with less.
It is closely related, yes. Eco-efficiency aims for relative improvements. The goal is to reduce the environmental impact or resource use per unit of economic output. Think concepts like Factor 4 or Factor 10, which propose the potential to quadruple or even tenfold resource productivity. It's about optimizing the existing system, using less material, less energy per widget produced.
And the big appeal is often cost savings, right? Less waste, lower energy bills.
Absolutely. Efficiency gains often lead to direct economic benefits, which makes this approach popular.
But it has that notorious Achilles heel you mentioned, the rebound effect.
Exactly. This is the critical limitation of relying solely on efficiency. When efficiency makes a product or service cheaper, like driving a more fuel-efficient car, people might use the savings to consume more of it, drive further, or spend the saved money on other consumption activities that also have environmental impacts.
So the overall resource use might not decrease as much as expected or could even increase.
It can, yes. The efficiency gains get partially or sometimes even fully eaten up by increased overall consumption. This suggests that while efficiency is necessary, it's probably not sufficient on its own to achieve absolute decoupling of economic activity from environmental impact.
Okay, so if efficiency isn't the whole answer because of rebound, we need more fundamental change. That brings us to the second strategy.
Right. The second strategy is eco-effectiveness, or sometimes called consistency. This aligns more with the principles of strong sustainability.
Consistency. How does that work?
Instead of just trying to be less bad, eco-effectiveness aims for fundamentally different positive impacts. It focuses on creating closed-loop systems. The most famous articulation of this is cradle-to-cradle thinking, developed by Michael Braungart and William McDonough.
Cradle to cradle, I've heard that term. What's the core idea?
The core idea is to design products and industrial systems based on nature's model, where waste equals food. Materials are designed from the outset to belong to one of two distinct cycles, or metabolisms. The biological loop, where materials, like biodegradable plastics or natural fibers, are designed to safely return to the soil as nutrients after use, decomposing and becoming food for new life. Or the technical loop, where materials, like metals or stable polymers, are designed to be high-quality inputs for new products, circulating indefinitely within industrial cycles without losing their quality through recycling, not downcycling.
So it fundamentally eliminates the concept of waste by design.
That's the ambition. It requires a radical rethinking of materials, science, product design, and business models towards circularity. It's about changing the structure of the system, not just optimizing the existing linear one.
Okay, that's a big structural shift. What's the third strategy? It sounds like it tackles our consumption habits head on.
It does. The third strategy is sufficiency. This is often the most challenging one, culturally and politically, in growth-oriented economies.
Why challenging?
Because sufficiency focuses directly on reducing the overall level of consumption. It questions the assumption that more is always better. It involves changing lifestyles and consumption patterns to live well within the planet's means.
So examples would be things like
Choosing to take holidays closer to home instead of long-haul flights, shifting from private car ownership to shared mobility services or public transport, repairing products instead of replacing them, participating actively in the sharing economy, sharing tools, clothes, etc. It's about prioritizing well-being over sheer material throughput.
it requires behavioral change, not just technological change.
Exactly. And while potentially very powerful in reducing environmental pressure reliably because it directly lowers demand, it often faces resistance as it can be perceived as promoting austerity or limiting individual choice. Even though proponents argue it can lead to higher quality of life, policy often finds it easier to promote efficiency or new tech than to directly influence consumption levels.
So achieving a sustainable bioeconomy likely requires integrating elements from all three strategies: efficiency, consistency, and sufficiency. That sounds incredibly complex to manage. You mentioned earlier it's a wicked problem.
It absolutely is. Wicked problems, a term from planning theory, describe challenges that are difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often hard to recognize. Think climate change, poverty, or indeed the bioeconomy transition.
What makes them so different from, say, engineering problems?
Unlike tame problems in engineering, where the problem is well-defined and has a clear solution, like building a bridge, wicked problems lack definitive formulation. There's no single right answer, solutions are often better or worse rather than true or false, and every wicked problem is essentially unique and linked to other wicked problems. You can't solve them using purely linear logic or quantitative optimization alone.
So how do you tackle them if traditional problem solving doesn't work?
It requires a shift in approach. Instead of seeking a single optimal solution through purely technical analysis, you need to embrace what's called collaborative rationality.
Collaborative rationality, what does that involve?
It's built on dialogue, stakeholder engagement, and integrating diverse forms of knowledge and values. It accepts that there will be conflicting perspectives and aims to find workable paths forward through deliberation, negotiation, and learning, rather than assuming a single, objectively best answer exists that can be calculated. It needs multifaceted information.
This sounds like it requires a fundamental change in how research itself is conducted, moving beyond just scientists talking to other scientists.
Precisely. We need to move beyond standard interdisciplinarity, where researchers from different scientific fields work together, like biologists working with chemists. For wicked problems, we increasingly need transdisciplinarity.
Transdisciplinarity.
Right.
What's the added dimension there?
Transdisciplinarity involves integrating non-academic or lay knowledge into the research and problem-solving process right alongside scientific expertise.
Lay knowledge, you mean like practical experience?
Exactly. It includes the practical wisdom of farmers, the local ecological knowledge of indigenous communities, the tacit understanding of industry practitioners, the values and concerns of citizens. It's about recognizing that solving real-world problems requires grounding scientific insights in the context of lived experience and societal values. Bringing that street-level, practical, local knowledge into the design process is crucial for ensuring solutions are not just technically feasible, but also socially acceptable, relevant, and ultimately implementable.
Okay, so collaboration and integrating diverse knowledge are key. What kind of framework helps us even begin to grasp the different parts and connections within this complex bioeconomy system?
Systems thinking is the essential mental toolkit here. It provides a way to understand complex phenomena by focusing on the whole, rather than just the parts in isolation.
How does it do that?
It encourages us to identify the key elements within a system, like farms, factories, consumers, policies. The relationships and interactions between those elements, like flows of materials, money, information, and the boundaries that define the system. Its real power lies in helping us grasp emergence.
Emergence, meaning?
Meaning that the behavior of the system as a whole often arises from the interactions of its parts in ways that cannot be predicted by just looking at the parts individually. The system is more than the sum of its parts. You can't understand the boom and bust cycles in biofuel markets, for example, by only studying plant biology or only studying oil prices. You have to understand how they interact within the larger economic and policy system.
And a critical part of understanding those interactions is knowing who the actors are within the system, right?
Yeah.
Who has the power, who has the interest?
Absolutely central. That's where actor analysis or stakeholder analysis comes in. For any bioeconomy initiative or policy, understanding the landscape of actors is crucial for effective governance.
How do you typically categorize these actors?
A common way is based on their level of interest in the issue and their level of influence or power over it. This helps identify different groups. You might have context setters like government agencies or funding bodies who have high influence but maybe lower direct interest. They set the rules of the game. Then there are key players, maybe large corporations, influential landowners, key technology developers who have both high interest and high influence. You absolutely need to engage them. You also have subjects, perhaps the general public, consumers, smallholder farmers in some contexts who have high interest because they're directly affected, but often have low influence. And finally, the crowd, those with low interest and low influence on this particular issue.
And mapping them out like this helps you design better policies or projects.
Exactly. It helps you anticipate potential conflicts, identify necessary alliances, ensure marginalized groups aren't overlooked, and tailor communication and engagement strategies. Ignoring key players or misunderstanding their motivations is a common reason why well-intentioned projects fail.
Okay, so we need systems thinking and actor analysis to manage the complexity. When it comes to actually assessing whether a specific bio-based product or value chain is truly sustainable, considering all these factors, what's the state-of-the-art methodology?
The most comprehensive approach currently available is Life Cycle Sustainability Assessment, or LCSA.
LCSA, that sounds broader than just environmental impact.
It is. LCSA aims to provide a holistic assessment by integrating 3 distinct components across the entire life cycle of a product or service, literally from cradle to grave, or ideally cradle to cradle.
What are the 3 components?
First, you have the traditional Environmental Life Cycle Assessment, LCA. This is the most established part. Quantifying environmental impacts like greenhouse gas emissions, global warming potential, water consumption, land use, eutrophication potential, toxicity, etc.
Okay, the environmental footprint. What's second?
Second is life cycle costing, LCC. This assesses the economic dimension, but critically, it aims to capture all costs incurred throughout the product's life cycle, borne by all parties involved, not just the manufacturer's production cost, but potentially also costs for the user, costs for disposal, sometimes even external economic costs.
So environmental, economic. The third must be social.
Exactly. The third, and often the most complex and still developing component, is social life cycle assessment, SLCA. This attempts to assess the potential positive and negative social impacts associated with the product's life cycle.
How do you even measure social impact systematically?
It's challenging. Methodologies are still evolving. Often, impacts are categorized by a stakeholder group, like impacts on workers, wages, working conditions, health and safety, impacts on consumers, health, safety, information, impacts on the local community, job creation, land rights, cultural heritage, impacts on society at large, contribution to inequality, technology development. Or sometimes impacts are assessed along specific pathways, like impacts related to human rights, labor practices, or governance.
So LCSA tries to bring environment, economy, and society together under one assessment framework.
That's the goal. Because only by looking at all 3 dimensions simultaneously can you identify potential trade-offs and avoid burden shifting, where solving a problem in one dimension, like reducing environmental impact, inadvertently creates a new problem in another dimension, like causing job losses or negative health impacts. It forces a more integrated view, which is essential for managing those wicked problems we talked about.
Can you give us a concrete example of how LCSA reveals those trade-offs? You mentioned a case study comparing ethanol from different feedstocks.
Yes, there was an interesting LCSA comparing ethanol produced from miscanthus, which is a perennial energy grass often grown in Europe, versus ethanol produced from sugarcane, primarily in Brazil.
Okay, miscanthus in Europe versus sugarcane in Brazil. What did the LCSA find?
The results were really illuminating regarding trade-offs. From a purely environmental perspective, LCA, the Brazilian sugarcane ethanol often performed better.
Why was that?
Largely due to 2 factors. Sugarcane generally requires lower fertilizer inputs than miscanthus might need in some European conditions. And crucially, the Brazilian system achieves high energy efficiency, often energy autonomy, by burning the bagasse residue for process energy, as we discussed. It's a very integrated energy efficient system environmentally.
Okay, so sugarcane wins on environment. But what about the social side, SLCA?
That's where the picture flipped completely. The LCSA indicated that miscanthus ethanol produced in Europe generally performed better socially. Because its production typically occurs within the context of well-regulated European labor laws, offering relatively stable, fairly compensated employment, often creating needed jobs in rural areas.
And the sugarcane system in Brazil.
The social assessment often highlighted concerns associated with poorer working conditions on some large plantations, issues around low wages, reliance on seasonal or temporary labor, and historical land tenure conflicts in certain regions.
So a clear trade-off.
Yeah.
Sugarcane might be environmentally more efficient in that context, but miscanthus production was socially more beneficial according to the assessment.
Exactly. The LCSA didn't give a single best answer. It revealed a complex trade-off profile. It forces policymakers, businesses, and consumers to explicitly acknowledge that optimizing solely for, say, climate mitigation, an environmental goal, might come at a significant social cost, or vice versa. Making decisions then requires consciously weighing these different dimensions based on societal priorities. LCSA provides the integrated information needed for that difficult balancing act.
That really highlights the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And managing this kind of complexity, navigating these trade-offs, recognizing the opportunities hidden in the problems, it sounds like it requires a new kind of professional, a different skill set than maybe we've traditionally trained for.
Absolutely. The sheer scale and interconnectedness of the bioeconomy transformation, linking agriculture, forestry, marine resources, industrial processing, energy systems, waste management, policy, social equity, demands people who can think across traditional disciplinary boundaries.
You mentioned earlier the incongruities, like 8 million people dying of hunger while vast amounts of food are wasted elsewhere. These create opportunities.
Huge entrepreneurial opportunities, wicked problems, system failures, glaring incongruities. These are precisely the spaces where innovation and entrepreneurship can thrive by providing novel solutions. But recognizing and acting on those opportunities requires a specific kind of profile.
Which is?
The demand is increasingly for what are called T-shaped professionals.
T-shaped. Can you visualize that for us?
Imagine the letter T. The vertical stroke represents deep disciplinary expertise in one specific area, maybe plant genetics or chemical engineering or supply chain management. You need that depth. But the horizontal stroke represents the ability to collaborate across disciplines, to understand the language and perspectives of people in other fields, and to have a broad knowledge of the entire bio-based value chain from primary production right through to market commercialization and end-of-life considerations.
So deep expertise combined with broad understanding and collaboration skills.
Exactly. You need people who can connect the dots, who can see how a breakthrough in enzyme technology might impact farm economics, or how a change in consumer preference for biodegradable packaging creates demands back up the supply chain to forestry or agriculture. These T-shaped individuals are essential for building and managing those complex value webs we talked about.
And we see this kind of interdisciplinary thinking emerging in entrepreneurial ventures, even tackling problems in unexpected places like cities.
Absolutely. A really creative example is a startup that developed the Graviplant.
Graviplant. What does it do?
It's essentially an engineered system that allows trees to grow perpendicular to building facades, like horizontally out from a wall.
Trees growing sideways out of buildings?
Mm-hmm.
How? Why?
It uses a rotating planter system and specific lighting to manage the tree's growth against gravity. The why is fascinating. It's a direct response to the dual wicked problems of rapidly decreasing green space in dense urban areas and the severe air pollution often found in those same areas. It merges plant science, mechanical engineering, sensor technology, and urban planning principles.
To create vertical forests on existing buildings, essentially?
In a way, yes. It's a systems-based entrepreneurial solution trying to reintegrate functional green infrastructure directly into the built environment to address specific environmental and health challenges. It perfectly illustrates that kind of cross-disciplinary problem-solving approach the bioeconomy needs. #outro.
Wow. We've covered an enormous amount of ground today. From the fundamental planetary boundaries being breached, like biochemical flows, and the shocking GWP of N2O, all the way to the intricacies of LCSA revealing trade-offs between sugarcane and miscanthus ethanol, and the need for T-shaped professionals and innovations like sideways growing trees.
It's a vast topic.
It really is. But if there's one core takeaway for our listeners, it seems to be that the bioeconomy isn't just a simple technological substitution swap oil for plants. It's a profound societal transformation. It demands we move away from fragmented, siloed thinking, where we try to solve neat, tame problems, and instead embrace integrated approaches fit for messy, interconnected, wicked problems.
Absolutely. And this transformation fundamentally challenges our traditional notions of economic growth. We essentially face two potential pathways forward for achieving sustainability, particularly conservation. On one hand, there's the path of growth abstinence, deliberately reducing overall economic throughput. This requires profound societal changes in consumption patterns and likely significant wealth redistribution, which is politically very difficult.
And the alternative?
The alternative is the neo-Schumpeterian approach. This argues for achieving sustainability through innovation and structural change. It focuses on decoupling economic growth from resource exploitation and environmental impact. The idea is to foster qualitative, structure-changing development, think Schumpeter's creative destruction, where new, sustainable industries and technologies replace old, polluting ones, rather than pursuing purely quantitative, income-increasing growth that just scales up the existing unsustainable model.
Creative destruction for a sustainable future. So if this massive transformation, this creative destruction, is necessary and perhaps inevitable, what's the hard truth? The final provocative thought that policymakers and entrepreneurs really need to grapple with as they navigate this transition.
I think the hardest truth is that this transition won't be a clean switch. It will feature a long, messy period of coexistence.
Coexistence,
Yeah.
meaning the old fossil-based system and the new bio-based system running side by side.
Exactly. For decades, potentially. Traditional fossil-based industries will continue to operate and may even innovate rapidly in response to the competition sometimes called the sailing ship effect, where an old technology improves dramatically just before it's finally superseded. At the same time, the new bio-based industries will be scaling up, facing their own technical and economic hurdles.
So the challenge isn't just building the new, but managing the decline and transformation of the old simultaneously.
Precisely. The real challenge for policymakers, investors, and entrepreneurs is not just inventing and deploying new bio-based technologies. It's actively steering innovation and investment in both the declining fossil sector to manage its phase-out efficiently and justly, and the emerging bio-based sector, all at the same time. It involves overcoming massive inertia and entrenched interests, that classic not invented here syndrome, where established players resist disruptive change. And, critically, it requires proactively managing the significant regional distributional effects, the winners and losers, that this global transformation will inevitably create. You have to govern the messy overlap, not just plan for the endpoint.
Steering innovation in both the old and the new, managing the overlap, and dealing with the regional impacts. That is indeed a compelling and remarkably complex challenge. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly detailed deep dive today.
It was my pleasure. A lot to think about.
Definitely. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the ideas shaping our future.